She was broken, ignored, underestimated, but never defeated. While others cried for sympathy, she disappeared, rebuilt silently, and returned stronger, without asking anyone to notice. There is something different about her. You won't notice it at first. She doesn't try to stand out. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't fight for attention in crowded rooms. In fact, most people misunderstand her completely because she doesn't react the way they expect. When life hits her, she doesn't run to people. She doesn't post about it. She doesn't ask the world to feel sorry for her. She simply disappears in that silence. It confuses people because they are used to seeing pain expressed loudly, through anger, through sadness, through desperation. But her pain is different. It's quiet, controlled, internal. And that's where her power begins. Most people, when they're hurt, look for someone to blame. They replay the situation again and again, trying to prove how unfair it was. They seek validation from others, hoping someone will confirm that they were wronged. But a Sigma female doesn't stay there, not because she doesn't feel pain, but because she refuses to live in it. She understands something most people never truly grasp. Playing the victim might give temporary comfort, but it slowly destroys your power, and she values her power too much to trade it for sympathy. When betrayal happens, she doesn't collapse in front of people. She absorbs it, quietly. She takes a step back, not out of weakness, but out of awareness. She knows that reacting emotionally in the moment will only make things worse. So she creates distance, not to escape reality, but to understand it. And in that distance, she begins to see things clearly. She sees the patterns she ignored. She sees the red flags she tolerated. She sees where she gave too much and where she expected too little. This is where she separates herself from everyone else. Because instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" she asks, "What is this trying to teach me?" That one shift changes everything. It turns pain into information, and information into growth. A Sigma female doesn't deny what she feels. She feels it deeply. The disappointment, the anger, the quiet heartbreak that doesn't need words. But she doesn't let those emotions control her decisions. She lets them pass through her, without letting them define her. This is something very few people can do. Most people either suppress their emotions completely, or they let their emotions take over entirely. She does neither. She observes them, and that observation gives her control. There are nights when she sits alone, thinking. No distractions, no noise, just her thoughts. And in those moments, she rebuilds herself piece by piece. Not physically, but mentally. She questions everything. Her choices, her boundaries, her standards. Not in a way that breaks her, but in a way that sharpens her. Because she knows something important. Growth is uncomfortable, and she's not afraid of discomfort. While others try to escape pain, she studies it. She sits with it long enough to understand where it came from, and why it affected her the way it did. This is why she doesn't repeat the same mistakes. Because she doesn't just move on, she evolves. There's a moment in every Sigma female's life where something breaks her deeply. It could be betrayal. It could be rejection. It could be a period where everything falls apart at once. And in that moment, she has a choice. She can either stay broken, or she can rebuild. Most people rebuild on the surface. They try to look stronger, act stronger, convince others that they've moved on. But inside, nothing really changes. A Sigma female doesn't do that. She rebuilds from the inside out. She changes the way she thinks. She becomes more aware of who she trusts, more careful with where she invests her energy, more selective about who gets access to her. Not because she becomes cold, but because she becomes intentional. She stops explaining herself to people who don't understand her. She stops chasing closure from people who already showed their true nature. She stops expecting loyalty from people who never valued it. And slowly, she becomes untouchable. Not because she pushes everyone away, but because she learns how to stand on her own. One of the most powerful things about her is that she doesn't need an audience to grow. She doesn't need people to see her progress. She doesn't need approval. Everything she builds in silence. And that silence, it's not emptiness. It's transformation. While others are talking about what they've been through, she's already working on who she's becoming. While others are seeking attention, she's strengthening her mind. While others are stuck in the past, she's building her future. This is why people underestimate her, because they only see her when she's quiet. They don't see the process. They don't see the nights she spent questioning herself, the moments she had to choose discipline over emotion, the times she walked away when it would have been easier to stay. They only see the result, and by the time they notice it, it's already too late. A Sigma female doesn't announce her growth. She doesn't say, "I've changed." She shows it through her actions, through her boundaries, through her silence, through the way she no longer reacts to things that once affected her deeply. That's when people start to feel it, not hear it. Feel it, because her energy changes. She becomes calmer, but stronger, more distant, but more focused, less reactive, but more aware. And that shift is powerful. People who once had access to her start to realize they don't anymore. Not because she blocked them, not because she created drama, but because she simply moved on without noise, without explanation, without looking back. That's something most people struggle with. They need closure. They need the last word. They need to be understood. A Sigma female doesn't, because she understands something deeper. Not everyone deserves access to her thoughts. Not everyone deserves explanations. And not every situation deserves her energy. So instead of wasting time trying to fix what's already broken, she invests that time into herself. She learns new things. She builds new habits. She creates a life that doesn't depend on anyone else. And slowly, she becomes stronger than the situation that once hurt her. This is why she never plays the victim, because she refuses to give her past that much power. She knows that staying in a victim mindset means staying stuck. It means letting someone else's actions control your future, and she will never give anyone that kind of control. Instead, she takes responsibility, not for what others did, but for how she responds to it. That's where her real strength lies. She doesn't say, "This happened to me, so I can't move forward." She says, "This happened, so now I know what to do differently." And that mindset, it changes everything. Because once you take control of your response, you take control of your life. A Sigma female doesn't wait for things to get better. She makes them better, quietly, consistently, without needing validation. She understands that no one is coming to save her. And instead of seeing that as something negative, she turns it into freedom. Because if no one is coming to save her, then no one can control her either. And that realization, it makes her unstoppable. She stops depending on others emotionally. She stops expecting people to understand her. She stops waiting for the perfect moment. She just starts building, piece by piece, day by day, silently. And over time, that silent effort turns into something powerful. She becomes someone who doesn't need to prove anything, someone who doesn't react to everything, someone who doesn't break easily anymore, not because life got easier, but because she got stronger. And that strength, it doesn't come from pretending nothing hurts. It comes from facing everything and choosing to rise anyway. There comes a point where she no longer feels the need to explain herself. Not because she has nothing to say, but because she understands that explanations don't change people who are committed to misunderstanding her. So she lets them think whatever they want. She lets them assume. She lets them judge. She lets them create their own version of her in their minds. And she doesn't correct them. Because she has learned something most people never do. Not every opinion deserves a response. A Sigma female protects her energy the same way others protect their reputation. Carefully, intentionally, without compromise. She no longer reacts to disrespect the way she used to. There was a time when certain words would have hurt her deeply. Certain actions would have kept her awake at night. But now, she sees things differently. She sees the intention behind people's behavior. She recognizes patterns faster. And instead of reacting emotionally, she adjusts her distance. That's her form of control. Not confrontation, not arguments, not revenge, just distance. And that distance speaks louder than anything she could ever say. People notice when she becomes unavailable, when she stops engaging, when she stops giving her time and attention freely. They feel the absence of her presence. But by then, she's already moved on internally. That's the part most people don't understand. They think she's just being quiet. They don't realize she has already made a decision. Because once a Sigma female sees something clearly, she doesn't go back to pretending it's not there. She doesn't ignore red flags anymore. She doesn't justify disrespect. She doesn't wait for people to change. She accepts reality as it is, and then she moves accordingly. This is why she rarely gets caught in the same situation twice. Because she doesn't just learn lessons, she applies them. There's a quiet discipline in the way she lives. It's not loud, it's not obvious, but it's there in everything she does, in the way she manages her time, in the way she chooses who to be around, in the way she walks away from anything that feels wrong. She doesn't argue with reality anymore. She works with it. If something doesn't align with her values, she removes herself. If someone shows inconsistency, she steps back. If a situation drains her energy, she lets it go. No drama, no overthinking, no emotional chaos, just clear decisions. That clarity is what makes her different. Most people hesitate. They stay longer than they should. They give more chances than necessary. They ignore what they feel because they're afraid of being alone. A Sigma female isn't afraid of being alone. She's afraid of losing herself. And that fear keeps her aligned. She would rather walk away from something that almost works than stay in something that slowly destroys her. That's a level of self-respect most people never reach, because it requires honesty, brutal honesty. It requires looking at situations without emotion and accepting them for what they truly are. And once she sees the truth, she doesn't try to change it. She changes her position in it. That's her strategy, not control, not force, just alignment. Over time, this way of living builds something powerful inside her, a kind of inner stability that doesn't shake easily. She becomes less dependent on external validation, less affected by opinions, less reactive to situations that once would have overwhelmed her. And that stability? It creates a quiet confidence, not the kind that needs to be seen, not the kind that needs to be proven, the kind that just exists. You can feel it in the way she carries herself, in the way she speaks less, but says more, in the way she observes before she reacts. There's no rush in her movements, no desperation in her decisions, no need to compete with anyone, because she's not trying to be better than others. She's focused on being better than who she used to be. That's her only competition, and she takes it seriously. Every experience becomes a lesson. Every mistake becomes a guide. Every setback becomes a setup for something stronger. She doesn't waste pain. She uses it. She turns it into discipline, into awareness, into strength that most people will never understand, because they never allowed themselves to go that deep. That's why she doesn't talk about everything she's been through. Not because it wasn't hard, but because she doesn't need to prove it. Her strength is not something she explains. It's something she embodies, and that's what makes her presence different. There's a calmness in her that can't be faked, a stillness that comes from knowing she has already survived things people don't even know about. That kind of strength doesn't seek attention. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't chase recognition. It just exists. And when people come into her life now, they feel it. They feel the boundaries, the standards, the quiet expectation that they either align with her energy or they don't stay. She no longer lowers herself to be understood. She no longer explains her worth. She no longer tries to fit into spaces that don't respect her. She outgrows them, silently. That's her pattern, not destruction, not confrontation. Growth, always growth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means letting go of people she once cared about, even when it requires starting over, because she knows something most people avoid. Staying the same is more painful than changing. So she chooses change, again and again, until one day she looks back and realizes she's no longer the person who once felt lost. She's someone else now, someone stronger, more aware, more controlled, someone who doesn't break the same way anymore. And that's when everything shifts. People who once underestimated her start to notice her, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence changed. There's a weight to it now, a quiet authority, a sense of self that doesn't depend on anything external. And that's what makes her powerful. Not perfection, not superiority. Self-mastery. She has mastered her emotions, her reactions, her decisions. Not completely, but enough to move through life without losing herself. And that's rare, because most people spend their lives reacting. She spends hers responding. That difference? It changes everything. It changes the way she handles conflict, the way she builds relationships, the way she moves through challenges. She doesn't get lost in situations anymore. She navigates them with awareness, with control, with intention. And because of that, she doesn't need to play the victim. Because she's no longer at the mercy of what happens to her. She creates her own direction. She chooses her own path. And most importantly, she takes full ownership of her life. That's what sets her apart. Not the absence of pain, but the way she transforms it. Not the lack of challenges, but the way she rises through them. Not the need to be understood, but the ability to stand alone without losing herself. That's the Sigma female. She doesn't break for the world to see. She rebuilds where no one is watching. And when she returns, she doesn't need to say anything, because her presence says it all.